I don't know if you've ever heard of the Leadville Carnival Palace. I won't blame you if you haven't, because I never had either. But the Leadville Carnival Palace was, I believe, the largest building ever constructed, made entirely of ice. It was built in Leadville, which is a city, I think, in the United States, in 1895. And it was a very impressive structure. Apparently it cost $20,000 to create. It measured 450 feet long by 320 feet wide. It had 5-foot thick walls, made obviously of ice. It had 2 octagonal towers, which rose 90 feet at the northern entrance. Beautifully arched doorways led visitors inside. Smaller 60-foot towers flanked the sides of the south wall. There was fairly obviously a skating rink inside, where 1,000 skaters could skate. There were 2 beautiful ballrooms and a restaurant. A 20-foot wide promenade would lead people down the middle of the palace. And over 250 men were employed to build the palace. But eventually, in December of 1895, it was completed in time for Christmas, and visitors flocked to this ice palace, and many testified that it was the happiest Christmas they had experienced. And the palace remained open until March, where I think you can guess what started to happen. Rumours started to circulate that the Leadville Carnival Palace was melting, and visitors strangely stopped flocking to the palace, and eventually in March it had to be closed down. And when all the accounts were drawn up, they discovered they had made a significant loss on the ice palace. Now you might wonder, why do I tell that story? Well, you might think, well, those are foolish people. Foolish people to build a palace out of ice. But the reality is, all of us can be equally foolish. It's almost the standard foolishness of all humanity. We pour all sorts of energy, all sorts of money, all sorts of effort into things which ultimately will not last. Many of us in this world will sadly reach the end of our lives and discover that we have, as it were, made a loss. We may have poured all sorts of money and effort into all sorts of things, only to discover that it's worthless in the end. Well, that really is the lesson that God is teaching Nebuchadnezzar in the chapter we've just read, and the lesson he's teaching us today as well. As we read, King Nebuchadnezzar, the great king of Babylon, had a very troubling dream. He dreamed that he saw a statue, and the statue's head was made of gold. Its arms and chest were made of silver, had a belly of bronze and legs of stone, but with feet that were mixed with clay. And in his dream he saw a rock, a rough, unhewed, small, relatively speaking, rock, come and hit the stone legs, and the whole thing crumbled. And he was troubled by this dream, and he asks the astrologers and the magicians and all the wise men of Babylon to tell him not only the interpretation, but the dream itself. He keeps secret what the dream was, because as he said, I know that if I tell you the dream, you'll just make up some nonsense, and I'll never know whether it's true or not. But if you tell me the dream as well, I'll know that you have hidden knowledge. You have knowledge from God." Well, understandably, the wise men are not thrilled when they hear this news. It's almost amusing when you hear their response. They say to him, "This is not possible. No one can tell you this. No magician, no wise man has ever been asked to do such a thing. This knowledge belongs only to God, and he doesn't dwell with flesh. He doesn't dwell with man," they say. But Nebuchadnezzar, who seemed quite a petulant sort of king, said, "If you can't tell me the dream and its interpretation, I am going to destroy you all and make your houses into an ash heap or a dung heap." So the wise men are in a pickle. They have a big problem. And Daniel and his 3 friends are among them. They too were amongst the wise men of Babylon. They had been promoted in chapter 1 because Nebuchadnezzar had seen the wisdom that was with them, even though they were just Jewish exiles. And Daniel, wisely, goes to the king and asks for time. He says, "Let me pray. Let me talk to my God and your God. And let me ask him the interpretation." And thankfully, God grants Daniel and his 3 friends the interpretation of the dream. And you have a beautiful prayer in verses 20 to 23 where Daniel thanks God for providing the interpretation. You can see a bit of that prayer on the front of your service sheet. And he explains to King Nebuchadnezzar the meaning of the dream. So what I'd like to do this morning is look at that dream and seek to understand better what the meaning was. And then we're going to look at its meaning for Nebuchadnezzar, why God gave the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. Secondly, its meaning for Daniel and his 3 friends, because as we read in, I didn't make a note of the verse, but later on in the passage, it was also given for the benefit of Daniel and his 3 friends. See what it meant for them. And then lastly, we're going to see what it means for us living today. But let's look at the interpretation of the dream verse first. Nebuchadnezzar said that he saw a statue with a head of gold, and Daniel reveals to Nebuchadnezzar that this head of gold is none other than Nebuchadnezzar himself and the whole kingdom of Babylon. Babylon was a mighty empire in its day. If you've ever gone to the British Museum, you can see some of the remaining monuments and artifacts from the Babylonian Empire. There's a statue that you can sit on. And, actually you can't sit on it. I did sit on it, and I got told off by the security guard. But there's this big, huge statue, which I believe came from the city of Babylon. And it was mighty and wealthy. Still to this day, people speak of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon as one of the wonders of the ancient world. And Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, "You are the head of gold. You are a great kingdom. God has made you great. God has given you wealth. He has given you power. And you are the head of gold." But then, in verse 39, Daniel moves on. And he says, "After you shall arise," well, actually he says, "but after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours." He says to Nebuchadnezzar, "Your kingdom will not last forever. After you will come another kingdom. This is the kingdom that is made of silver, the 2 arms and chest of the statue." And in this chapter, Daniel doesn't elaborate on the meaning of this kingdom that will come after them. But thankfully, later on in the book of Daniel, we have more visions that Daniel has. And in a sense, those visions help us to understand this one. You know how sometimes if you're doing a test or in a book, sometimes you have the answers at the back of the book, and if you're cheating, you can look there and write down the answers. Well, a little bit, Daniel chapter 7 functions a little bit like that for Daniel chapter 2. In Daniel chapter 7, we see a much more detailed vision which helps us to understand the meaning of Daniel chapter 2. In Daniel 7, Daniel sees 4 beasts, like Nebuchadnezzar saw 4 parts to this statue. And these 4 beasts rise out of the water, and these 4 beasts too are different kingdoms of men. The first beast is Babylon. And in Daniel chapter 7, we read these words after the first beast. We read, and suddenly another beast, a second like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, arise, devour much flesh. And with these details, we can infer what kingdom this is. It's the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. It's portrayed here like a bear. Did you notice it said it was raised up on one side? That's almost certainly because of the Medes and the Persians, the Persian was the greater half of the empire. And eventually the Persians took over and kind of swallowed up the Medes. So the Medo-Persian Empire became the Persian Empire. And they conquered many nations, not least the kingdom of Babylon. And this is the silver part of the statue, the Medes and the Persians being the 2 different arms. But even that kingdom doesn't continue. Look again at verse 39. It says, after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. Daniel says another kingdom's coming. The kingdom which defeats you will not last itself. And a third kingdom. And again, if we look at Daniel chapter 7, we read of a third beast. And we read, after this, after the bear, I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And from that description, we can say almost certainly this is referring to the Greek Empire. Perhaps you've heard of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, possibly the greatest general in history. And he swept over the known world as it was then. And he conquered everything in his path. And yet he died at the early age of, I think he was only 30, in his 30s at least. In fact, there's a story that Julius Caesar went to visit the tomb of Alexander the Great when he was in his 50s, I think. And we're told that apparently he wept at the tomb of Alexander because he said, at 30, Alexander had conquered the world, and I have done nothing. Now you can question the wisdom and the legitimacy of those tears, but that's what he said, and it illustrates the speed that Alexander conquered the world. But you notice it says this leopard had 4 wings on its back like a bird. And Alexander's kingdom was split between his 4 generals. I forget the names of them. And his kingdom was divided amongst those generals. And that's probably what's being referred to by those 4 wings. But then we come to the 4th kingdom. Look at verse 40. Daniel says, and the 4th kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all others. And once again, going back to Daniel chapter 7, we read of a 4th beast. After this I saw in the night visions and beheld a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And this kingdom is almost certainly referring to the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire with its mighty armies. Perhaps you had to sit through history lessons at school where you learn about the tortoise, which the Roman soldiers had, where they had their shields and they would be protected as they attacked cities and armies. And Rome was famous for its mighty military. And that is, again, almost certainly what's being referred to here by this dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong beast, whose empire stretched beyond all of the empires that had come before it. But then listen to the description that Daniel gives after that, in verse 41. He says, "Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom, the Roman Empire, shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it. Just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay, and as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay." This huge, mighty empire will dwindle and crumble and fall. And did you notice that it's this kingdom which is at the base of the statue, the foundation, the thing which is supposed to be strongest turns out to be weakest. And that's the ultimate message of this dream. Human kingdoms can look so great, they can look so mighty, they can look so beautiful and strong, but ultimately they have feet of clay. Have you heard that expression? It means when someone seems wonderful on the outside, but there's a fatal flaw, a fatal weakness underneath. And all human kingdoms are like that. However great, however wealthy, however beautiful they might seem, they crumble in the end. And Daniel reveals the dream, and he reveals the interpretation to Nebuchadnezzar. So what did it mean for Nebuchadnezzar? What was Nebuchadnezzar supposed to take away from this dream? Well, Daniel actually tells him. Daniel tells him in verse, if I can find it, he tells him in verse, it's here somewhere, verse 37. He says, "You, O king, are king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory." Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, "You are great. Your wealth is amazing. Your power is phenomenal. But God is the one who has given it to you." Nebuchadnezzar was not a good man. We got a glimpse of that by the way he was going to treat the wise men when he asked them to do something that is impossible for men to do by themselves. He was not a righteous man. Nevertheless, God blessed him. God bestowed on him power and riches and a kingdom which was the greatest that had ever been. And the lesson for Nebuchadnezzar is, don't be proud. Don't let it literally go to your head. Everything you have received is a gift from God. And look at verse 39. It says, "But after you shall arise another kingdom." That's the lesson to all human rulers, to all human wise and powerful men. But after you. There will always be an after you. No human being exists forever. However much we accomplish, however much we gain, there will come someone after us who will get what we gained. And Daniel, or God really through Daniel, is teaching Nebuchadnezzar, don't be proud. Remember, however great you are now, it will not last forever. And all that you've been given, you've gained from the hand of God. But what does it mean for Daniel and his three friends? Because the dream was for them as well. God gave the interpretation to them. So what was the lesson for them? Well, for them it was an encouragement. They were exiled miles and miles away from their homeland. They had been taken from their friends, from their family. They were in a land which they did not know, and they had been taken from the promised lands that God had given to them. But the encouragement here is that no matter how great Babylon looked, no matter how lasting and precious and indestructible it seemed, it would come to an end. It would not last forever. That mighty kingdom which had swallowed up Judah would itself be swallowed up. We sometimes sing a hymn, don't we? Ancient of Days. And that hymn has a verse which says, "Though the nations rage, kingdoms rise and fall, there is still one king reigning over all." At the end of the dream, we read of how a small stone, not made with human hands, will come and destroy the kingdom of stone, and with it all the kingdoms that came before. And that kingdom would not come from man, but it would come from heaven. And this is an encouragement to these Jewish exiles. God is still on the throne. Don't be awed by the kingdoms around. Don't be disheartened by the strength and the might around you. The kingdom will not last. God has his kingdom. But what about for us? What is the message of this dream for us living today? We've looked at the meaning for Nebuchadnezzar. We looked at the meaning for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel. But what about for us? Does it mean anything for us today? Well, it surely does. It tells us the same thing it told Nebuchadnezzar for a start. We too have a temptation to pride. We may not have become ruler of a kingdom, but we might be satisfied with our bank balance, with our career, with our house, with our car, with our possessions. And we can be tempted to be proud and to be self-satisfied with what we have. And this dream is a warning to us. Everything we have is a gift from God's hand. God gives, and he can take away. They are not necessarily even a demonstration of God's approval. God did not approve of Nebuchadnezzar's behavior, and yet he blessed him. And it's the same today. God can bless people who do not deserve it. That's what grace is. Just because you have wealth, just because you have riches, doesn't mean God approves of you. In fact, it may only heighten your condemnation because God has bestowed all these things on you, and he'll say, "What did you do with it? What did you do with what I gave to you?" Think of Judas. Judas performed miracles just like the other apostles. He cast out demons. He healed the sick. But he wasn't saved. And in the end, Jesus said of him, it would have been better if he had never been born. Do you see? It's what we do with what we're given that matters. Jesus himself said to his disciples when they came back after casting out demons and healing people, and they were rejoicing, he said, "Don't rejoice in this. Rejoice that your names are written in heaven. Because if your name is written in heaven, it will never pass away. If your name is only written on earth, then one day it'll come to an end. And one day you'll face God in judgment. But if your name is written in heaven, then it will never fade away." How do you get your name written in heaven? You get your name written in heaven by bowing the knee to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords and accepting that all things are gifts from his hand, including the gift of forgiveness, the gift of salvation that comes through Jesus Christ, who we'll come to in just a moment. That's the first lesson for us. Don't be proud. Don't boast in your riches or your blessings, whatever they might be. They're gifts from God's hands, and they will not last forever. Don't set your heart on this world. But secondly, that the lesson that was for Daniel and his three friends also applies to us. Don't be disheartened when you see the world looking great and mighty and powerful and God seems to be silent and absent. Don't be disheartened because however strong this world might seem, however godless it might appear, it will not last. It does not last forever. For Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel, the Babylonian Empire looked pretty lasting. It looked pretty permanent. But in the end, it crumbled and fell. And the same is true for any government, for any human power. It will not last forever. We've been a little bit disheartened recently by various bills that have been passed in Parliament and a diminishment of the value of life in various different ways. And I'm sure we can be disheartened when we look at the news and see all sorts of miserable things happening in this country and around the world. And although those things are tragic, and although they are difficult, we needn't be disheartened, because God has said these things will happen, and it will not last forever. All oppression, all injustice, all these things are, in the sight of God, a small and passing thing. That's not to diminish their evil. That's not to diminish the pain that it causes. But it is to encourage us that one day God is coming and Christ will make all things new. We read that in the book of Revelation. Behold, I make all things new. It might not happen as quickly as we would like. We might be wondering when it's going to happen, but God says it is going to happen. And this dream teaches us that. But there's another thing to be shared, something which is unique to us, which Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel and his three friends didn't get to experience. They died in the middle of the fulfillment of this dream. Nebuchadnezzar learned the interpretation, but he never saw the fulfillment. Daniel saw a little bit of the fulfillment, but he didn't see it to the end. We living today have the wonderful privilege of being able to read this dream, read its interpretation, and see how it was fulfilled completely. We can look at our history books and we can read of the Babylonian Empire. We can read of the Persians and the Medes. We can read of the Greek army and Alexander the Great. We can read of the Roman Empire. And we can read of that small stone that hit the base of the statue, which I'll come to just in a moment at the end. But you might say, you might be a skeptical sort of person, and you might be like many secular scholars. And if you read the secular commentators of Daniel, what they'll tell you, say, well, this dream is clearly evidence that Daniel wasn't written by a Jewish exile living in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Clearly, it was written much later, and they spoke of these things which had already happened, but they put them in the lips of Daniel to make it look like Daniel knew more than he really did. And people say, well, nobody knows the future, so clearly this must have been written after these things happened and then put into the lips of Daniel, who lived in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. And you can say that, if you like, when it comes to the head of gold and the arms of silver, and maybe even the belly of bronze. Our earliest copies of Daniel do not stretch back to the time of Nebuchadnezzar. They only stretch back about as far as the time of the Greek Empire. But the problem with that interpretation is it doesn't explain the fourth kingdom. Some secular scholars try to say, well, the fourth kingdom is the Seleucid Empire. Ever heard of the Seleucid Empire? Most of us haven't, and that's kind of the point. The Seleucid Empire does not fit the description described by Daniel. The Roman Empire fits perfectly. And perhaps the clincher is what happened during the time of the Roman rulers. What happened that could explain the meaning of this little stone not cut by human hands, which strikes the feet and destroys the kingdoms and grows into a mountain which lasts forever? Can you think of anything that might have happened in the time of the Romans that applies to? Well, if you can't, let me read from Luke chapter 2. And they're very familiar words. We read them every Christmas. It came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This census first took place when Quirinius was governing Syria. So all went to be registered, everyone to his own city. Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed wife, who was with child. So it was that while they were there, the days were completed for her to be delivered, and she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Jesus was born in the reign of the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus. And he ministered, died, and rose again in the reign of Tiberius Caesar. His followers preached and were persecuted during the reign of Nero Caesar. And Jerusalem was destroyed in the reigns of Vespasian and Titus Caesar. And eventually, that Roman Empire crumbled and fell. But Christ's followers remain to this day. That is the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 2. Jesus was that little stone not cut by human hands. Yes, he was human, but he did not come from earth. He came from heaven. He was not impressive like the kingdoms of this world. He wasn't rich. He was born in a manger. He wasn't powerful in a human sense. He was a peasant living in Nazareth. He didn't have all the things that Nebuchadnezzar had and the rulers like Alexander the Great and the Caesars had. Nevertheless, from him was built a kingdom which lasts to this day and will exist for all of time. The Roman Empire fell. Lesser emperors became kings, and the kingdom became weak and divided, as described in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. But Christ's kingdom has grown and grown and grown. As he himself said, like a mustard seed grows into the largest of trees, so his kingdom is like that. But Christ's kingdom is not like the kingdoms of this world. The kingdoms of this world are built on power, on wealth, on monuments. That's not what Christ's kingdom is built on. Christ's kingdom is built on love. It's built on forgiveness. It's built on a message of peace. And that's what the gospel is. We're charged by our King, King Jesus, to go out into all the world and preach the gospel, telling people that there is salvation not found in human things, not in a bigger bank balance, not in better holidays, not in all the things we try to find joy and satisfaction in. But there's joy in a restored relationship with our Maker. And only then can we experience true satisfaction. Only then can we experience life as it was meant to be lived. Only then can we receive the forgiveness of sins that we all desperately need. That's what Christ's kingdom is all about. And we, sitting here today, are the evidence of it. We are the fulfillment, or part of the fulfillment, of this dream. Let that thought amaze you. Daniel didn't see it, but we do. And one day it will come to completion. One day Christ will return and gather all his people to him. And that kingdom will be shown in all its glory, and it's all its majesty and all its wonder. And the last question I just want to ask all of us here this morning or watching online is, are you a part of that kingdom? What are you living for? Are you living for the kingdoms of this world which will crumble and fall? Or are you living for a heavenly kingdom whose builder and maker is God? If you want to, come to Christ. Bow the knee to him. Accept the sacrifice that he made on your behalf. And then live through him. Live by him. Build your life on him who is the rock. And you'll never live to regret it. And that's why I've chosen as our final hymn, number 92, or our final hymn before we come to the Lord's table. Number 92 in the hymn book. 92, based on Psalm 90, our God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. So let's close this service by singing number 92.